It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Evan Balkan. Hi, Evan. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're here to promote your book. Your book is called Root That Mountain Down. How many books have you written to date?
11 published. You have to add a few more. If you say written, a few more that haven't seen the light of day. But yeah, 11 published.
Yeah, I actually should rephrase the way I asked that to other authors, because in the past, when I've said, how many have you written, and I've had answers like 42, and
Right.
how many published? 3. So,
Yeah,
you're right. Okay. Because a lot of them just kind of sit around, yeah? They don't get finished, or you get stuck in a spot or something like that?
yeah. I mean, I've always maintained there's no such thing as wasted effort. I mean, it is always chunks you can use in other projects, or just the act of doing it is its own kind of, that at worst it's practice. So I've got several of those just sort of sitting in an electronic drawer somewhere.
All right. Do you write full time? Is that your job, or do you do something else?
Well, it's sort of my job. I mean, I certainly cannot claim that I would make a good enough living off of book sales. So, but I do teach writing as well. So, it's all kind of interconnected. So, writing is how I make a living, but really, it's the teaching of the writing.
Okay. Well, this is an interesting idea that we can get into. I've always contended that writing is sort of a 2-part process. There's the creative side, and then there is the technical craft side. Now, you can teach the craft, but how do you teach the creativity?
It's funny. I actually, I've talked at great length with my students about this, because, most of my students live lives that are like most of us, or have a lot of demands and not a lot of time. And that's the big balance. I think, if you make a conscious decision, most of my students are 18, 19, 20. And at that point, they're sort of figuring out if this is something they really want to pursue. And that really becomes part of the lifestyle, actually, is figuring out how you can make a go of it. I remember very clearly when I was in my early 20s, I had to go to work. So I would actually set the alarm at an absurdly early hour and get in a couple hours of writing before I went off, because it was important to me. I just frankly couldn't do that anymore. I'm just not young enough for that. I just couldn't do it. But I got very lucky. I mean, I have a job that I'm off in the summer. I'm off for chunks of time in the winter, spring break. So I can do it. But if, like I say, if that part of it you can't teach the creativity, it's got to be just the way in which you choose to live your life. So for them, a lot of them are. And I'm not being critical here. It's just the way of the world. They're sort of tethered to their phones. I understand that, and I'm telling them all the time, you gotta unplug, go take walks in the woods, take a shower, whatever, and there is your creativity time. You always have to be open to everything around you. Everything is potential material. Every conversation you overhear, waiting for the bus or whatever it is. But you have to be engaged in the world. And I'm not so sure that's teaching creativity, but it's teaching how to live in such a way that you're open to the creative elements around you. And I think when you become conscious of that, it really does make then the sitting down and writing stuff a whole lot easier, because there's material there, right? I mean, the material is everywhere. It's everywhere we are. But that's the big part. I think for a lot of my students, and me too, you get caught up with life, and it's the easiest thing in the world at the end of the day to, not write, right? So it's just got to be that's got to be a conscious decision on their part, really.
Well, I think that's a great answer, because a lot of authors that I've interviewed in the past said half of their process is sitting there staring out the window. And it puts them in that sort of zone where you have to kind of free your mind, almost in a meditative state.
No question about it. I mean, I truly, and it's not a joke, I sometimes, I think very often I do my best writing when I'm walking in the woods, honestly. And people think I'm nuts because I will often, because I didn't really pay attention, I will run into somebody while I'm doing this, but I actually will often interview myself while I'm walking. I will ask myself questions either about the project I'm working on or just whatever it is. And it's out loud, and I will answer. And it's a way of kind of engaging with the material in a way that, I don't know, might seem counterintuitive or sort of silly to a lot of people, but it is, it's like, you put it really well, staring out the window. I think we all need that time to kind of shut off everything around you and just let your mind, it's not really wandering, it's engaging if the material's there and you're trying to work it out, for sure.
Right, exactly. So going back to what I said at the beginning about it being a two-part process, so once you've got the creative side going and you get the story written, then you've got to go through and do it very left brain, if you will, and find exactly the right words, and this is where the craft comes in. Because even the greatest authors that I've interviewed, like David Baldacci, or I shouldn't say the greatest, the most successful, like David Baldacci and, who else has been on? Ann Charles, a bunch of them that have, made a lot of money and have been very successful at their craft. Started out, they said that their first work was terrible because they didn't have the skills to figure out exactly which words to use and which ones not to, and not to ramble on too long. All of that is the craft that I think can be taught. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I agree, and that is where, I mean, it's at a very basic level. I find that most of my students, where they are running into trouble, is there is a lot of tell. So they will turn in prose pieces where whoever the speaker is, whatever the narrator is, I'm telling this, I'm telling this, I'm telling this, and when they learn to go back and instead of, sometimes that's perfectly appropriate, but oftentimes that narrative can really take off when everything that's being told is instead shown in scenes. And those are things that I think just are not kind of intuitive. They need to be taught that. The other thing about, honestly, the craft part is having, I tell them when the class is over, I really encourage them to reach out to a couple of their classmates and form some sort of writing group that meets with some regularity so that you always have a deadline. There's no better, motivator than knowing something's got to come in at a certain time. And you will, once you're forcing yourself to get the writing done, the craft gets there eventually. I mean, it's like anything else. If you want to be a basketball player, you shoot a lot of free throws over and over and over again.
Right.
You want to write, you write over and over and over again. And you have to read, of course, too. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, any of those great authors that you've interviewed, I guarantee you they are just inveterate readers, right? I mean, you steal all kinds of stuff from people over and over again because that's how you learn the craft, for sure. You don't have to go to classes. You don't have to go to graduate school. You don't do any of that stuff. You just read the great authors. Yeah, you'll figure it out eventually.
Well, I think that holds true across the board with any kind of creative artist. I'm a musician by trade, singer-songwriter, and
nice.
What do? I listen to music. That's what you do to get better, and because it's what you love doing. I think we all started out listening to music before we started writing music. Likewise with authors, I think they started reading before they started to write. And sure, that's exactly where you get all of your fodder from.
So you can tell me if I'm completely out of bounds here, because I know you're interviewing me, but I have such admiration for musicians, in part because I can't do it, and I always wish that I could. Can I ask you, like, who were some of the influences on you? I find that fascinating.
Sure. Well, I would probably say the Beatles, second to Elton John and Billy Joel, because I'm a piano player.
Great.
So that was the sort of niche that I was looking for, that I was going for.
Yeah.
Was that kind of
Oh, yeah,
singer-songwriter. One thing that's interesting about music that doesn't have the same problem necessarily as when you said something about too wordy or they're going to tell everything. One thing about writing a pop song is that the music part of it conforms the amount of words that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It sort of confines you into that space. You've got to make the phrase work. So what I end up doing is just substituting this word for that word or this phrase for that phrase. But it can never get too wordy because it won't fit. So in a way, it's like working with parameters. It makes it a little easier. Where I know that if you're writing a novel, you can just kind of go on and on and on forever, right? And there's nothing stopping you from, oh God, this is too long. I've seen films like that. I've seen films that people who have been given free rein and an endless budget, that the film just goes on and on and on. And it's like, why didn't they edit out 20 minutes of this, this scene and blah, blah, blah. So it's this, but like I said, with music, you really can't do that because it's got to fit.
It's funny. I actually, last week, I was meeting with my class on a Thursday night, and we were, several of my students had I'm not a poet. It's kind of the one kind of writing that I don't do. But the students that evening had turned in, we were doing 3 students, and they had all turned in a poem. And we were just talking about language and the sound of language, and I always have them read it out loud. And it's funny, I actually showed them a line, a Beatles, a Paul McCartney line from the song Mother Nature's Son, which I adore. And we were talking about word choice and just the sound, and he has this one line with a series of long A sounds in them. And we were actually talking about just what you were just saying, that the music is sort of the thing that's going to dictate it. And one of the things about, I would maintain that songwriters are poets, obviously, but when you have the accompaniment of the music, sometimes you can have a lyric that really is not so poetic because it's got this great accompaniment to it. But there was this one example from McCartney that did both. The music is lovely, but if you just take the line itself, it has a real lyricism to it, and it's all very, very deliberate. It's not like he's just throwing this stuff out. I mean, there's a deliberate choice about what words he's going to use and what sounds they make and so forth. And I think it's all kind of intertwined. And, in the end, what you're talking about, people just engaging in something creative, which is, I don't know, for my money, kind of, the most wonderful thing in the world, really.
Well, you mentioned poetry, and it does relate to pop songwriting. I've had a few poets on, and the one thing that I've noticed is there is a generational thing where people my age still insist that poetry rhymes.
Yeah,
where I've had like 20-year-old poets on who nothing rhymes.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, how is this any different than a short story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was explained to me that I accepted as a good, valid argument is that it's the economy of words.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't have to rhyme anymore, but you have to be very selective which words you use to make the biggest impact in the smallest amount of writing.
I would agree 100%. And that's really, and I do confess this to them when I'm teaching an introduction to creative writing class, for example. They will do poetry, and I tell them, I'm not a poet. I will give you, I think, pretty solid feedback here, but I do prose. I also teach screenwriting. I write a lot of screenplays. So nonfiction, fiction, I'm all very comfortable with that. But that's the one thing about poetry that I really do hammer home to them is if you've got a poem that's a total of 100, words, you can't just have 10 of them be throwaways. That's 10% of your work. If you extrapolate that to like a novel of 50,000 words, where that's a huge chunk of it. That's just it's not going to be any good. Every single word has to do a ton of work, and that is the thing about the economy of the language, that every single word really has to do a lot of work. And that's where I admire poets. I wish I could do it myself, but I just don't. And that's the other thing that I really, that's why my ears perked up when you said you're a singer-songwriter. I really admire people who are able to work in both of it. I mean, you're both a writer and a musician. That's fascinating to me. I wish I could do that. I really wish I could do that.
Well, again, we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the creative process. And I've had the best lyrics come to me while I was driving alone, because that puts me in the zone, so you can kind of drive autonomously and you sort of zone out. And it's really inconvenient when you're driving, because you have to pull over and stop and write it down. Otherwise you forget it. We used to, back in the old days when people had answering machines, I used to call my house and then just sing into the machine, so that when I got home, it would be there and I wouldn't have forgotten it. But, now you can do stuff like that with your phone. You can record, and so it's fine. But there is that process of the creativity, and then there's the craft of putting it together. That's really, because the music is also as much creative as the words are, but putting it together is a technique, I think, to get it to fit and to get it to work. Because I've had misaligned words with the tune. I think Steve Martin even did a routine with that back in the 70s with his banjo. And he said something like, did you ever notice that all banjo songs are happy songs? He says there are no dreary banjo songs. And then he started in with this, oh, death and greed and pain and sorrow. And he's doing in this real up, lifted finger-picking stuff. And it was funny. It was really funny, because he's right. So that's a bit of a process, too, to try to match the mood of the song with the lyrics to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's another thing that as I've gotten older, I have been paying more and more attention in my writing to thematics. I think very, very early on, I really started writing in earnest in my 20s, and I was very concerned at that point with putting together words and paragraphs that seemed really pretty, that showed that I had a facility with the language. And I realized relatively quickly that was really not getting me anywhere at all. That in the end, you need to be able to tell a story. So you take somebody like a Dan Brown, right? He did the Da Vinci Code. Okay. And I know people who will dismiss that book. It didn't do a whole lot for me, if I'm honest. I think on a sentence level, it's not the greatest writing in the world, but it's masterful in its scaffolding, the structure of the book. I mean, like that is an enormous skill. Again, it's not really up my alley, but boy, is that a tough thing to do well. In the end, I am becoming more and more conscious of that sort of stuff, of the actual physical structure of the book, and then when it's over, what have I said? What is it that the reader's going to take away from it? There's a message there. So it's that question of not what happens in the book, but what is it about, right? And that's the thing, I think, where there are a lot of it's similar to what you were just talking about, that you use the word align. I really struggle a lot sometimes I can come up with a very good scene, I think. And then it's figuring out, does this really belong? Is this scene supporting whatever the ultimate message of this book is, which can be a very tough thing to sustain over, 500 pages or whatever it is, right? So that seems to be actually where I spend a lot of my kind of, difficulty. That becomes a very hard thing for me. I really want the book to say something in the end, and that's where as a reader, I spend a lot of time figuring out how writers, a whole lot better than I am, do that ultimately. That on a superficial level, it's just an entertaining story. But really, what is going on here? There is some sort of agenda, and I don't mean that in a negative way. There's something that the writer feels that this is necessary to say to the world. And I think that's the sort of thing that I'm not so sure you can teach, that just takes a lot of reading and a lot of writing.
What if you tried it in reverse? In other words, you get the takeaway down first and then figure out how to get there.
Actually, this this book that we start with, the Root That Mountain Down, that actually is what that book it was.
Okay.
I was very certain that I wanted that book is about the blood diamond trade and the Civil War in Sierra Leone, which was something that I think, that happened when I was in my 20s. I was sort of vaguely aware of it. It also happened at the same time that I got engaged. I bought a diamond ring. I had no sense of really what that meant. I went to a jeweler and I bought a ring. It never occurred to me that it could have come, with a severed hand attached to it on some level, right? So I was interested in that idea, and then I tried to fit the narrative around that ultimate message. It's the only time I've ever done that in a book, and in some weird way, this book actually feels extremely different to me than anything else I've ever written. And I'm not so. It feels almost foreign to me, actually, in a strange way. Part of that was because it was written over such a long period of time. I revised it a million times, but that is definitely a way to go about it. And actually, I do have to say that the thing that I'm working on now takes place in Chile in the early '70s during the coup, and it sort of is doing that too. It's actually taking this historical moment as the kind of framing, and I'm still sort of figuring out what the personal story, inside of it is going to be. But yeah, that is definitely an approach. The difficulty there, I think, is that very often people get really attached to a grand idea, and then it overwhelms the narrative, right? It almost feels like a screed or a tract or something, which most people are not particularly attracted to. I actually just finished reading a nonfiction book about the writing of Crime and Punishment, and that was sort of, which is, I hope this is obvious, but I'm not comparing myself to Dostoevsky. But he, I don't pretend to do that, but that was kind of that he had a philosophical viewpoint that he wanted to put out in the world, and really struggled to figure out how he would do that without really ever making that point, just creating a narrative that would ultimately wrap itself in that philosophy. And he wound up doing it brilliantly. But that can be a real tough thing to do. I mean, you sort of feel the writer just sort of screaming at you over and over again, which I don't think you ever really want to do.
It can sort of turn into a rant at that point, and is something that I think most writers would want to avoid, unless that's the point. Unless they're just saying, okay, this book is about this, and here I'm going to rant on for 300 pages. And if you could get through that, I couldn't read a book like that. I think I would stop after about the first 10 pages and say, that's enough of that. Okay, I got it. I get it.
Yeah, I don't think a novel is your best vehicle for that.
No, absolutely.
But think of a novel like The Stranger by Camus, which I adore. I love that book. I mean, that is philosophy masquerading as a fiction, as narrative fiction, and to me, it works beautifully. But he also wrote nonfiction, which is far more. That's the one that's sort of in your face, saying this is my view of the world, and that's not for everybody, for sure.
Well, let's see. We got to kind of wind this down, but your book, Root That Mountain Down, and it's basically you have sort of integrated a true story or a true event, like with Blood Diamond, but it's a fictional account. Is that correct?
Right. Yep, that's right.
Okay. And the book is out? It is available?
It is out. Yep. Through Tuscany Bay is the publisher, and then it's in all the outlets as well, Amazon and all those good places. Yep.
All right. Do you want to give out a website, a personal one, or one for the book?
Sure. I mean, this is good impetus for me. I haven't touched it in years. I really need to update it and get this book on there. So I will do that. But it's a Wix site, WIX, and if you just kind of look at my name, Evan Balkan, all one word, .wix, Wix. It'll pop up there, and this is good motivation to get working on that. I gotta get that thing updated.
Okay, but in the meantime, people can find the book on Amazon and
and again, the publisher is Tuscany Bay, so they've got the website, and you can find it there too, for sure.
Okay, Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a nice conversation, nice chatting with you. Best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to The Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Pat Daly. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Douglas, and you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Let's see. You've got a book out called Spark, and I read through this, and I have no idea. I think it's a little out of my league. But we'll get to that in a second. With the part that I did understand was it says you're an engineer and a former Air Force test pilot. You worked at NASA, and you worked on the space shuttle and the International Space Station programs. Are you still doing that?
Yep. No. I left there and launched my own company and have been pretty much an independent owner-operator since.
I want to ask you a question about, it says that you're trying to bring new airplane designs to life. Is that what you're doing now?
Yeah, I consult in the flight test realm. So I've been working with some autonomous vehicles, drones that'll carry people, and then also just wrapped up some work last year on a new regional jet project. Okay.
Well, here's the question I have, and it's been one that I've been contemplating for a long time, but I've never actually asked it to anybody, and you seem like a very qualified person to ask this question to. Now, I was born in 1962, and since then, and probably a few years prior, we've had jet transportation. The first one I can remember going on as a kid was the 707, all right? Now, they ran at the same speed that they do now. And what I'm wondering is, with all this time that's gone by, 60 years that we've had this technology, why is it that we're still, the bulk of our aircraft is still subsonic? It's still, is it too expensive to bust the sound barrier? Is that what the problem is?
There's a couple of things that factor into that. One is of course, the expense. We did have the Concorde for a while, which was, supersonic across the ocean, but it turned out that people in general don't like hearing sonic booms over their house, and it frightens the livestock. And so, Boeing had one years ago too that they were trying to build the SST, they were calling it, and then so the Concorde got into commercial service, but then it stopped flying as well because supersonic flight over populated areas was just very unpopular because the booms can be very loud, very disturbing. So now there is a program that NASA is working on and some other organizations that they're calling the Quiet Spike program. And it's a way of modifying and shaping that sonic boom so that it's no louder at ground level than hearing a car door close. So I think we'll live to see that in production and commercial service.
Well, where are these planes that I've been reading about that can go from New York to Tokyo in 2 hours? These sort of rocket ones that send you up into the stratosphere and bring you back down again.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're nowhere around right now.
Okay.
I mean, you can do it with certain military spy planes, and they've got some test vehicles that are even hypersonic and get up into near Earth orbit before they come back down. But yeah, it's not something we can buy a ticket on yet.
Well, that's too bad, because I've flown so much from the United States to Asia, and that flight is just grueling, and it hasn't changed.
It is.
You know, the length of time on that flight is still 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, and it's just an awful long time to be sitting on an airplane.
It is. It's brutal. And, I mean, thank God now for the lie flat seats that you can get in some cabins on some airlines. That makes it much more pleasant, but it's still a long time to be in an aluminum tube.
I agree. Yeah, the lie flat seats are definitely an improvement, but the time still hasn't changed. It's just sort of remarkable to me, like certain technologies, gunpowder, for example, we've had for a long, long time. And as sophisticated as the weapons that we do have, it's still, the gun is still the basic premise of the gunpowder shooting some sort of a projectile. That hasn't changed in hundreds of years. We don't have laser guns or phasers like on Star Trek. They're just not around. Yep. I'm always a bit frustrated when things go so slow.
I want my jetpack.
I want my jetpack. I want my flying car. I want my phaser, Yeah. We did get the communicators, though. We did get those.
We did. It's pretty doggone amazing.
Especially when Motorola made the flip phone, and it looked exactly like the one from Star Trek. That was cool.
Yeah. First Enterprise.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, okay, you've got a book out called Spark, and I'm just going to read this. Solar Prime Augmented Reality Park, a destination for gamers, brought to you in a stunning debut novel by Pat Daly. Okay, what does that first part mean? Solar Prime Augmented Reality Park?
Okay, so that's the kind of tortured acronym that led me to Spark as the name of the place. But I lived in Southern California for quite a while when I was a test pilot, and outside of Barstow, there were these solar farms, and there were these large circular arrays of mirrors that reflected up onto a pretty tall tower, and then all that reflected sunlight would heat up some molten salt, and then that heat would be transferred to water and to turn it into steam that would then supply electricity. So one of those was called Solar 1, and then the next one was Solar 2. And so I wanted solar power to be an integral part of this because I love the technology, but I hate the inefficiency of technology at the moment. So I kind of created this incredibly efficient solar power production system, and that's where Solar Prime came from. And then augmented reality. I mean, I've watched the rise of virtual reality and virtual gaming, and it's pretty cool, and yet you're really space constrained because if you're doing it in your living room, then you're putting the TV at risk, the cat at risk, your coffee table at risk.
Yeah.
So augmented reality, at least in my vision of it, would superimpose virtual constructs over a real background. And then you could use a theme park-like setting for all your adventures. And you'd be able to react to reality and avoid running into walls and stepping on children. And at the same time, you'd have the fantastic in front of you, the orcs you could battle or the spaceships you could fly on.
Is this like the holodeck? Speaking of Star Trek.
No. Holodeck, to me, is just virtual reality writ large. This is more a super sophisticated Google Glass meets Disneyland kind of place.
You're talking about, okay, those glasses that essentially is a computer that you flip with your eyes, that it's sort of...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Although now it's superimposing these virtual things over reality. So you get the best of both worlds, I think.
So you still see what's actually in the room, but it's like a heads-up display, basically, right?
Exactly. You can see what's actually in the room, and yet you see all the guidance and the your enemies and whatnot that aren't real, but they appear real in your display.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, yeah, that technology is definitely there, right? I mean, it's there on airplanes, and even some high-end cars have that now, right? BMW has it,
yeah.
I think, and where it's right in the windshield, basically.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's cool. So your book is about that, and is this a fiction, or is it? Tell us kind of the
Yep, this is
the premise of the thing.
Yeah, it's completely fiction. It is a science fiction near future novel that I wrote to be family friendly. I wanted it to be something that everyone from grandpa to the 10-year-old in the house could pick up, and nobody would worry about, oh my God, we better keep them away from page 72. There's a really steamy scene there. So I wanted it to be family friendly. And so generally that tends to point you towards the young adult segment. So you can have an occasional cuss word and you can have romance, but you're not going to see the really explicit sex scenes or spouting blood or things along that line.
Okay. So who is the character? Is there a main character?
Yep. There are actually two. There's the main male character, and his name is Will Kwan. And he's the child of a Korean father and an American mother. He is unfortunately cursed genetically with bright orange hair, and he's the male lead. And then the female lead is a young lady named Shakri Patel. And she is christened early on with a nickname by her father, and that nickname is Feral Daughter, because she doesn't want to do ballet. She doesn't want to be a cheerleader. She wants to do mixed martial arts. She wants to get into gaming and live action role play type things. So she's a little bit tougher and wilder than Will, but they end up, even though they butt heads, they end up holding hands by the end of the novel.
So they fall in love by the end of the novel.
Yep.
Well, that's good. I like that. I also like something else you said about genetically cursed with bright orange hair. I wonder if Prince Harry feels the same way.
Could be.
It wouldn't be my first choice. Definitely not. Although, Lucille Ball made a career with that hair.
Yeah, as did Maureen O'Hara.
Yeah.
So there are gingers out there that do very well and can capitalize on that as an asset.
It's true. Okay, so why did you write this book? This is your first book, yeah? So why did you write it?
Yeah, my first novel. I've got some nonfiction stuff out there, one nonfiction book and some magazine articles and stuff, but I wrote this because I've got two daughters, and for a while they were both playing a game called Pokemon Go. And so because I wanted to be up on what the kids were doing, I started playing Pokemon Go. And that led me to the thought about, what if you could take this very rudimentary technology and expand it to a Disney World scale and make it so you don't have to look through your phone. So you had these wraparound goggles that would display it all so you could have your hands free. And I thought, man, I'd buy a ticket. And so the more I thought about it, the more detailed my internal fantasy became, and I decided I got to write this book. And so I sat down in front of the computer and I started banging away on it, and lo and behold, ended up with a novel.
How long did it take you?
It took me over a year to actually write it, from first words on the page to first draft complete. And then it took me another year and a half of doing revisions with a developmental editor and going through the whole publication process before it became a book on the shelf.
Okay. Did you have to shop it around, or was it picked up by the publisher right away?
Yeah, I had to shop it around. I actually went through 22 different agencies before I ended up connecting with my current publisher, Inklings Publishing. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I think it paid off for me in the end.
22? Wow, that is a lot of them.
Yeah.
I think that would have discouraged
some
people. I think they would have quit after about 5 or 6. Perseverance pays off, apparently. Yeah.
It does. And I was very close to self-publishing, and I am so glad that I didn't, because I think the product that came out of Inklings, with the help of their editors, ended up being a much better, tighter story than what I had originally written.
There is a craft to it. You know, you can have all the creativity in the world to think of the story, but there is a craft in actually choosing the right amount of words and the right words to use to really, like you said, to tighten it up. I know that I've seen that with a lot of authors that I've had on the show, and it takes a while. You know, most of them have said, like I've interviewed David Baldacci 3 times, and he's a pretty famous, successful author at this point. But he said, you know, for the first 15 years of his writing, he couldn't make a dime, and his first work was terrible. So it took him a long time to really hone his craft, and perseverance paid off. You know, 15 years later, he's one of our bigger authors in the United States. So it does.
I like his stuff.
Yeah, I love his stuff too. All right. Well, Pat, we got to wind this down. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yeah. I do all my blogging at feraldaughters.wordpress.com. And that's probably the best way to get in touch with me and track me down and get an update on when book 2 is coming out.
Okay. You want to spell that out just so people don't misspell it and not find it?
Absolutely. It's FERALDAUGHTERPRESS.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much. How long has the book been out, by the way?
Book got published in May of last year, and the sequel should be out in February of next year, or maybe a little sooner. Oh,
already doing the sequel, eh?
Yep.
How's it doing? How's the book doing? You getting some good reviews?
Yeah, it's getting some good reviews. And our publisher just brought on a publicist, Mickey Mickelson of Creative Edge Publicity, and he is doing fantastic things for us. He is really helping us get our work and our brand out there. So that is helping already.
Oh, super. Glad to hear it. Yeah, we've interviewed quite a few of Mickey's clients, and we enjoy working with them. So, yeah, with that, thank you very much, Pat, for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. And best of luck with the book, and I look forward to seeing the sequel coming out next year sometime, yeah?
All right. Thank you for having me on the show, Douglas. I enjoyed talking with you, and best